The wooden steps of the grand staircase creaked a familiar, gentle complaint under my heels, a sound as much a part of my morning as the sunrise itself. Downstairs, the vast dining room was bathed in the soft golden light of a San Antonio morning, the kind of light that promises a day of warmth and clarity. The air was thick with the rich, comforting aroma of Marissa's freshly brewed coffee, a dark roast she knew I favored. It mingled with the scent of buttered toast and the faint, sweet perfume of the jasmine blooming just outside the open French doors. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, a carefully curated masterpiece of the life I had built. My son Robert sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the one my late husband Ernest and I had picked out decades ago. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his tablet as he scrolled through the morning's headlines. He was the calm center of my world, my quiet, artistic boy who had grown into a thoughtful, steady man. He looked up as I approached, and his face broke into that warm, easy smile that could still, after all these years, melt the fortress around my heart. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice a deep, familiar rumble. "Why are you up so early today? Big day at the office?" I smiled back, a practiced maternal gesture that hid the relentless churn of thoughts already spinning in my mind. Alvarez Lumber didn't run itself, and a new project, a massive contract for a sustainable housing development, was demanding every ounce of my attention. In the corner of the room, a splash of vibrant color against the polished hardwood floor, sat my grandson, Empt. He was meticulously, almost silently, constructing a tower from a mountain of Lego bricks. He's barely 7 years old, a whirlwind of boundless energy and ceaseless chatter. But sometimes, in moments like these, I felt I was looking at a soul far older, a maturity that was both astonishing and a little unsettling. Today he was strangely quiet. There was none of his typical enthusiastic narration, no sound effects for the imaginary construction workers, no requests for Grandma to admire his architectural prowess. He was just focused, his small fingers moving with intense precision, his world reduced to the interlocking of colorful plastic. I chalked it up to the singular focus of a child lost in play, a world I could only observe from the outside. I moved to the table and quickly drank the tall glass of orange juice waiting for me at my place. The usual sharp, sweet tang did little to clear the fog of an uneasy night's sleep. My brown leather handbag, a testament to years of boardrooms and business deals, was already perched on a nearby chair. I picked it up, running a quick mental inventory of its contents. Wallet, phone, reading glasses, the draft of the new proposal. Satisfied, I walked over to Robert and bent to kiss his forehead, a ritual as ingrained in our routine as the rising sun. Then, I crossed the room to Empt. I let my hand rest on his head, my fingers sinking into the softness of his hair, a simple touch that brought an involuntary smile to my lips. "Grandma's off to work," I said softly, my voice a warm caress. "You have a great day at school, sweetheart." Imati looked up from his creation. His big brown eyes, so like his father's, watched me without a word. There was no answering smile, no bye, Grandma. He just nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin, before his gaze dropped back to the Lego tower. It was a flicker of oddness, a discordant note in the morning symphony, but I dismissed it. He was absorbed. Reaching the grand entryway, I plucked my car keys from the ceramic bowl on the console table and pressed the unlock button. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I saw the black Cadillac in the garage flash its lights, a sleek beast of polished chrome and steel, waiting patiently for me. I took a deep, preparatory breath, steeling myself for the long day ahead. But just as my hand touched the cool brass of the doorknob, I heard it. The frantic patter of small, hurried footsteps on the hardwood floor behind me. Empt, moving with a speed that belied his small frame, ran toward me. His little hand shot out and clung tightly to the edge of my blazer, his grip surprisingly strong. I jumped, startled, the keys nearly slipping from my grasp. I turned to look down at him, and the sight stole the air from my lungs. His face was pale, a stark contrast to his usually rosy cheeks. His eyes were wide, cavernous, and filled with a raw, primal fear I had never seen in a child before, a fear that had no place on the innocent canvas of his face. He shot a quick, terrified glance back toward the dining room, where I could hear the faint clink of porcelain as Marissa tidied up the breakfast dishes. Then he leaned in, pressing his face close to my side, his voice a trembling, desperate whisper that seemed to be torn from the very depths of his soul. "Grandma, don't get in the car. It's really, really dangerous." My heart didn't just stop for a second. It seized, a painful, violent clench in my chest. The sounds of the house, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of birds outside, faded into a dull, roaring silence. I knelt down, the expensive fabric of my suit creasing on the marble floor, bringing myself to his eye level. I fought to keep my own expression calm, to project an aura of grandmotherly serenity, even as a tremor of pure dread began to shake me from the inside out. "What is it, honey? What's going on, Empt?" I asked, my voice a model of gentle concern, my hands resting lightly on his small, trembling shoulders. The boy looked around again, his gaze darting fearfully, as if the very walls had ears, as if invisible monsters lurked in the sun-drenched corners of our home. He moved closer, his whisper so low, so faint, I had to strain to hear it over the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. They said, "Grandma's car is going to explode, because Mom ordered it," the words. They didn't just cut through me like a knife. They were a shard of ice, plunging into my heart and freezing everything in its path. My blood ran cold, a glacial tide washing away all warmth, all sense of safety. Marissa, my daughter-in-law. The woman who had entered our lives like a bright, shining star, full of ambition and intelligence. The woman I had welcomed, mentored, and come to love as the daughter I never had. The woman who had been a part of my family, of my heart, for nearly a decade. It was impossible, a child's nightmare, a misunderstanding. It had to be. I tried to keep my face a serene mask of composure. I stroked Emmett's hair, the gesture automatic, but my mind was a chaotic whirlwind, a maelstrom of confusion and rising panic. How could a 7-year-old boy conjure such a horrific, specific accusation? Was this the product of an overactive imagination, a story overheard on television and twisted into a terrifying new shape? Or was something truly monstrously wrong happening right under my roof? At that precise moment, Marissa appeared in the archway of the dining room, my laptop bag held delicately in her hand. She smiled, a radiant, picture-perfect smile that reached her eyes, crinkling them at the corners in a way I had always found so endearing. "Mom, you forgot this," she said, her voice as sweet and smooth as honey. "I already charged the battery for you. Drive safe." Her words were a balm of normalcy, a soothing melody against the screeching discord of Emmett's warning. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't help but see something else lurking beneath the polished surface. Something indefinable, a fleeting shadow, a flicker of something that wasn't right. Robert emerged from the dining room behind her, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Yeah, Mom," he added, his voice full of its usual loving concern. "This new project is a lot of work these days. Take care of yourself." His tone was as affectionate as ever, but today it seemed to sound from a great distance, as if I were suddenly an outsider in my own family, looking at a familiar portrait that had been subtly, terrifyingly altered. I forced a smile, my facial muscles feeling stiff and unfamiliar. I took the bag from Marissa's hands, our fingers brushing for a moment. Her skin was warm. "Thanks, honey," I said, my voice a strained imitation of my own. "But I have a bit of a headache this morning." "A bad one. I think I'll take a taxi to work," just to be more relaxed. I had barely finished the sentence when I saw it, a slight, almost imperceptible raising of Marissa's left eyebrow. It was just for an instant, a micro-expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. But in my new state of hypervigilance, it was as loud as a gunshot. "Oh, why, Mom? If you want, I can drive you," she offered, her tone still perfectly sweet, though I thought I detected a new thin thread of tension woven into it. No need. I'd rather go alone." "Clear my head," I replied quickly, waving my hand dismissively. Marissa nodded, her perfect smile still in place. But I saw it again, that flicker of something in her eyes. Disappointment? Frustration? That disappeared instantly. It was so fleeting that anyone else, my former self included, would have missed it entirely. But now, after Empt's terrifying whisper, every one of her gestures, Every nuance of her expression seemed laden with suspicion, a clue in a puzzle I desperately did not want to solve. I turned my attention back to Empt and took his small, cold hand in mine. "You know what? I'll take MT to school on my way. We can spend a little extra time together," I said, forcing a cheerful tone, though inside, my world was tilting on its axis. I didn't wait for Marissa's reaction, for her permission or protest. I simply took my grandson's hand and headed straight for the door, a woman fleeing a house that no longer felt like a home. Emmet squeezed my hand tightly, his small fingers a lifeline, as if he was afraid I would vanish if he let go. I felt a slight tremor in his hand, a tangible manifestation of his fear, and it broke my heart into a million pieces. Outside, the morning air was warm, but a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature clung to me. The doorman, a man Marissa had highly recommended 2 years prior, hurried to open the heavy wrought iron gate when he saw me emerge. He bowed his head in his customary greeting, but his eyes, I noticed, avoided mine. He looked down, at the ground, at his shoes, anywhere but at my face. That small detail, that break in his normal deferential routine, sent another jolt of alarm through my already frayed nerves. We had worked for my family for 2 years. "He's honest, hard-working, completely trustworthy," Marissa had assured me. Now I wondered how much I had trusted her words, her judgment, her smile. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I opened the ride-sharing app. The screen indicated a car would arrive in 3 minutes. 3 minutes that stretched into an eternity. As I waited, I hugged Empt tightly, pulling his small body against mine, feeling the frantic, desperate pounding of my heart against my ribs. The boy nestled against me without saying a word, but his eyes, wide and staring over my shoulder at the house, reflected a terror so pure it was almost tangible. I stroked his hair, murmuring reassurances I didn't feel. "It's okay, sweetie. Grandma's here with you." In truth, I was trying to calm myself down, to anchor myself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving into a nightmare. A white Toyota sedan pulled up to the curb. I opened the back door, helped Empt climb inside, and then slid in after him. I kept his hand clutched in mine, a fragile connection, as if letting go would mean losing my last grip on sanity. I gave the driver the address of Empt's school, my voice a little shaky, but I forced it into a semblance of composure. Then I added the address of my office, though in the back of my mind, a new plan was already forming. I had already decided I wouldn't be going to work. Not today. As the car began to move, pulling away from the manicured lawns and stately homes of our residential area, I let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. But that feeling was as fragile as a pane of glass, poised to shatter at the slightest touch. I looked at Empt. He was hunched in his seat, his hands clasped together in his lap. His eyes still showed the lingering shadows of fear, but when he looked at me, I also saw a spark of absolute trust. I managed a small smile for him, trying to ease the suffocating tension in the small space. "Emet," I said, my voice low, almost a whisper, so the driver wouldn't overhear. "Can you tell me exactly what you heard?" "Tell me everything, in detail. I need to understand what happened completely." The boy nodded, his small face serious. I watched him press his lips together as if he were struggling to gather the immense courage it would take to speak the terrible words again. After a moment, he took a deep, shaky breath and began to speak, his voice still trembling. "This morning, I woke up really early. The sun wasn't even up yet. I went out to the yard to play with my toy robots, in the corner near the big rose bush where Mr. Wee usually stands guard." He paused and looked at me, as if to make sure I was still listening, still believing him. I squeezed his hand and nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I have a secret base behind the rose bushes," Empt continued, his voice even quieter now. And then I heard Mr. Wee talking on the phone. He was speaking in Chinese, really soft, like he didn't want anyone to hear him. I got curious, so I crawled closer. His eyes widened as he relived the moment, the memory fresh and terrifying. I heard a few sentences. Not very clear, but I heard him say, "The lady is about to leave." Then he said she just has to get in the car and it's going to explode. He swallowed hard. I also heard him mention Mom. He said everything was according to her orders. Emit's words were not just needles. They were daggers twisting in my heart. I felt my breathing grow heavy, shallow, but I forced my face to remain serene, a mask of calm for his sake. "Are you sure, sweetheart? Are you absolutely sure you didn't misunderstand?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. I had to be certain. I needed to know, with chilling finality, that this wasn't a child's fantasy. A terrible dream he was confusing with reality. Emmett nodded forcefully, his small head bobbing with a determination that was startling in a 7-year-old. "I wasn't wrong, Grandma," he said, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "Grandpa taught me those words. The lady is Lao Tai Tai, and to explode is Baoja. Mr. Wee said exactly that. I remember it very well." Hearing him speak those words, hearing him invoke the memory of my beloved Ernest, sent a profound chill down my spine. Memories of my husband flooded back like a powerful, unstoppable wave. I saw him so clearly, sitting on the porch swing on lazy Sunday afternoons, patiently teaching Emmett words and phrases in Chinese, his voice warm and full of love. He used to say it was the language of the future, a practical skill for a globalized world. But I knew the truth. He just wanted to spend more time with his grandson, to forge a special bond, to share a piece of himself. Those memories, once so sweet and comforting, were now like a double-edged blade, beautiful and excruciatingly painful at once. I looked at Empt, at his earnest, frightened face, and fought to contain the tidal wave of panic rising inside me. We, the guard whom Marissa had recommended, honest, hardworking, trustworthy. I had believed her. I had believed in the sincerity of her gaze when she spoke of him. But now I had to wonder if it had all been a performance, a meticulously crafted lie. And Marissa, the young woman I had considered a daughter, the one with whom I had built grand plans for the future of Alvarez Lumber. Could she truly be capable of plotting something so monstrous, so utterly depraved? The taxi moved through the familiar streets of San Antonio, the morning sunlight filtering through the window, casting dancing patterns on the upholstery. But I no longer had the presence of mind to notice the scenery. My mind was a dizzying vortex of 1,000 questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Why? What possible reason could Marissa have to do something like this? Was it money, power? Or was there some deep, festering resentment I had been completely blind to? And Empt, my sweet, innocent grandson. Why did he have to be the one to witness something so terrible? The car stopped in front of the elementary school. I paid the driver, asking him to wait for just a moment. I took Emmett's hand and helped him out onto the sidewalk. On the curb, I knelt down and hugged him tight, burying my face in his hair, inhaling the scent of his childhood. His small body trembled in my arms, and I felt my heart clench with a fierce, protective love. "Empt," I whispered into his ear, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "You are Grandma's hero. You saved my life. Now listen to me very, very closely. You cannot tell anyone what you told me today. Not anyone, not even your dad. Do you understand? Let Grandma handle this." I spoke the words with a conviction I didn't feel. Inside, I knew I was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss. How could I protect my grandson? How could I protect my family when the trap was being set by the very people closest to me? Emmett nodded repeatedly, his eyes shining with an absolute, unwavering trust that was both my strength and my greatest burden. I watched him walk into the schoolyard, his small figure with his oversized backpack disappearing into the sea of laughing, chatting students. But for me, that familiar, cheerful image no longer held the same innocence it once did. My grandson was carrying a weight too heavy for his small shoulders, and that knowledge tore me apart inside. I got back into the taxi and slammed the door shut, the sound echoing with a finality that felt like closing a door on my entire life as I knew it. "Driver, please," I said, my voice suddenly cold and hard as steel. "Turn around. Let's go back to the previous address. We're not going to the lumber company." The driver nodded without a word, and the car began its slow turn, carrying me back toward the danger I had just escaped. The taxi glided smoothly through the familiar, sun-dappled streets of San Antonio. The constant, low hum of the engine was a quiet, monotonous melody against the cacophony of my thoughts. I remained perfectly still, my gaze fixed on the world outside the window. watching as the morning light filtered through the canopy of old oak trees, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that danced on the glass. But my soul found no peace in the beauty of the day. Every corner, every familiar building, every row of trees seemed to awaken a memory, a fragment of a past I once believed was perfect. Now, they were only sharp, glittering shards, cutting into my heart every time I tried to grasp them. The car passed Brackenridge Park, a sprawling oasis of green where Ernest and I used to walk hand in hand every weekend, planning our future. I could still see him so clearly, sitting on a particular bench under a sprawling cypress tree, his old, worn notebook open on his lap, a pencil in his hand tracing the very first, audacious sketches for Alvarez Lumber. He always dreamed big, my Ernest. His eyes would shine with an almost holy fire as he talked about building a lumber company that wouldn't just be successful, but would conquer the world. "Teresa, do you see?" he used to say, his voice filled with a passion that was utterly infectious. "Wood isn't just a material. It's the soul of every home, the foundation of every family's story." I was a young newlywed then, barely out of college, but I let myself be swept away by that brilliant flame. I learned the business from the ground up, learning to transform his grand visions into concrete reality. Step by painstaking step, from that first small, dusty workshop until Alvarez Lumber became a name recognized and respected across the state. But now, sitting in the back of this anonymous taxi, a fugitive in my own life, I had to wonder if those dreams, that legacy, were worth the price of my own safety. When the car turned onto the main avenue, the imposing limestone facade of the university where Robert had graduated appeared in the distance. I was instantly transported back to that day, the pride swelling in my chest as I watched him cross the stage to receive his degree. I remembered the radiant smile on his face as he held up his business administration diploma for me to see. "So now I'm almost your apprentice, Mom," he had said, his voice brimming with excitement, his eyes full of admiration. I had laughed, patting him on the shoulder, completely convinced that my son would carry on the legacy that Ernest and I had started. Robert, with his quiet nature and his more artistic soul, had always brought a sense of peace and balance to my life. He didn't have my relentless drive or my burning ambition, but I cherished his sincerity and his kind heart. I had always told myself that as long as he was happy, I would be satisfied. Then the currents of memory carried me back to the day I first met Marissa. It was at a furniture export seminar in Dallas. She was young, barely in her 20s, a fresh-faced intern for a competing firm, but the intelligence and sharpness in her eyes impressed me immediately. She approached me during a coffee break, her gaze bright with what I took for genuine admiration when she mentioned Alvarez Lumber. "Mrs. Alvarez, your company is an inspiration to our generation," she told me, her voice ringing with a sincerity I never thought to question. I was captivated by her confidence, by that familiar fire of ambition that I recognized as a reflection of my own youth. I invited her to dinner that evening, and a few weeks later, I introduced her to Robert. Seeing them together, talking and laughing so easily, I believed with all my heart that Marissa would be the perfect piece to complete my son's life. A determined, strong, and ambitious woman, capable of balancing his gentle sweetness. How terribly, catastrophically wrong I was to think that she would become a part of our family. A daughter-in-law I could love and cherish like my own child. The most vivid memory, the one that still had the power to squeeze my heart with a painful intensity, was the day Emmett was born. I was pacing the hospital corridor outside the delivery room, far more nervous than Robert himself. My hands were clenched into fists so tight my knuckles had turned white. When the nurse finally emerged, carrying a tiny red-faced bundle, I was the first to hold him. His tiny, perfectly formed hand grasped my index finger with a surprising, primal strength, and in that moment I felt the entire world stop spinning. I thought then that I had nothing left to wish for, that my life was complete. Emmet was the light, the absolute, unadulterated joy of my life, especially after Ernest's passing. Every time I watched him grow, I recognized in him the image of his father, the same insatiable curiosity, the same quick intelligence, and that deep sensitivity that few people ever noticed. The taxi slowed and pulled to a stop a block away from the familiar wrought iron gate of our mansion. Bougainvillea vines, heavy with vibrant red blossoms, covered the high stone walls, their flowers trembling in the gentle morning breeze. That house, the one into which I had poured so much of my heart and soul, had once been my greatest pride. Now, it seemed like nothing more than a luxuriously decorated trap, hiding terrifying, unspeakable secrets within its beautiful walls. I paid the driver, took a deep, steadying breath, and tried to calm the frantic beating of my heart. But when I opened the car door to get out, my legs felt as heavy as lead. The image of the perfect family I had so carefully constructed in my mind for so many years had just been shattered, and the sharp, jagged fragments were scattered everywhere, waiting to cut me. I stood motionless on the sidewalk, waiting, my eyes fixed on the iron gate until I saw Robert and Marissa's car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street, presumably on their way to the office. Only when I was absolutely certain they were far away did I dare to move. I couldn't risk entering through the main gate, not with Wee standing guard. His shifty, downcast eyes from that morning seared into my memory. He, in whom I had once placed my trust, was now an unknown, a potential enemy, one more piece of the living hell I was trying to comprehend. I followed the side path of the house, walking slowly and quietly alongside the tall fence, which was covered in a dense curtain of hibiscus. The green branches swayed gently in the wind, as if trying to shield me from the world. I knew this yard intimately, every corner, every stepping stone. In the back, there was an old, almost unnoticeable wooden side door that led directly into the rear garden. I had always kept a spare key hidden under a specific decorative stone, tucked away behind a thicket of rose bushes. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I fumbled in the dirt, lifted the heavy stone, and felt the familiar cold of the metal as my fingers closed around the key. As I inserted it into the rusty lock, the screech of the old hinges made my heart leap into my throat. I held my breath, listening intently, fearing that the slightest sound would betray my presence. But the garden remained silent, save for the distant, cheerful chirping of birds. I slipped through the narrow opening and closed the door carefully behind me, as if I were stepping into another world entirely. I crossed the manicured lawn, hiding behind the broad trunks of the large oak trees, moving with a caution that felt alien in my own home. Every step was a battle between the overwhelming fear that threatened to paralyze me and the fierce determination to uncover the truth. My black Cadillac sat silently in its corner of the 3-car garage, but it was no longer just the car that took me to work every day. It was now an invisible, menacing threat. Empt's words echoed in my head, a relentless, terrifying mantra. Grandma's car is going to explode. I wondered how a 7-year-old boy could be forced to carry such a heavy, terrible burden, and how I, a woman with over 60 years of life and experience, had reached this point, doubting the people I loved most in the world. Just then, the phone in my pocket vibrated. The small, buzzing sound was enough to make me jump, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. I pulled it out and saw Marissa's name glowing on the screen. My heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm, as if it were a trapped bird trying to escape the cage of my ribs. I took a deep, ragged breath, forced myself to be calm, and answered, schooling my voice to sound steady and normal, even though inside I was a complete wreck. "I'm listening, honey." Marissa's voice on the other end was as sweet as ever, but today it sent a shiver of ice down my spine. "Mom, did you get to the office yet? I didn't see your car in the parking lot." Her words sounded like simple, casual concern, but I could feel the hidden agenda coiled beneath them like a snake. She was checking up on me. There was no doubt in my mind. Quickly, I formulated a lie, praying it would sound plausible. "Oh, I remembered I had an unexpected meeting with a lumber supplier out in San Juan del Rio," I said, improvising with the first location that came to mind. "I took a taxi straight there from the house. I'll probably be back at the office around noon. Or maybe later this afternoon." I paused, holding my breath, waiting for her reaction, silently praying that the tremor I felt in my body wouldn't translate into my voice. There were a few seconds of dead silence on the other end of the line, a brief but tense void that felt like an eternity. Then Marissa said, "Oh, I see. You should have let me know. I could have rescheduled the morning meeting." Her voice was still soft, but I detected a certain rigidity in it now, a slight edge, as if she were trying to conceal her frustration. I forced a light laugh, though I knew she couldn't see the grimace that accompanied it. My apologies. It was all very sudden. You handle the pending matters for now, I replied, and then, before she could ask any more questions, I hung up. When the phone screen went dark, I felt a powerful shiver run down my spine. Marissa was suspicious. I was sure of it, but I didn't have time to let fear overwhelm me. I had to act, and I had to act now. I went straight to the large tool shed at the back of the garden, where I knew Joseph, the gardener who had been with my family for over 20 years, would be at this time of day. Joseph was a reliable man, quiet, dedicated, and fiercely loyal to my late husband and me. I found him carefully cleaning a pair of pruning shears, his weathered face a mask of concentration, as if it were the most important job in the world. When he saw me, he jumped, his eyes wide with surprise. "Ma'am, what are you doing here? I thought you had already left for work." I held a finger to my lips, motioning for him to be quiet, and led him to a secluded corner behind the shed, where a thick stand of bushes blocked the view from the main house. "Joseph," I said, my voice low and grave, "I need your help with something. It's a confidential and very dangerous matter. No one must know about this, especially not we." I looked him straight in the eyes, trying to convey the crushing urgency of the situation in every word. Joseph's brow furrowed, the confusion evident on his honest face, but he simply nodded without asking any questions. I guided him to the garage and pointed at the Cadillac. "Go near that car and see if you notice anything strange underneath it. But listen to me very carefully, only look. Do not touch anything." I emphasized every word, praying with every fiber of my being that Emt's warning had been a terrible misunderstanding after all. Joseph knelt down, his old knees cracking in the silence. He squinted, his head tilted as he peered under the car's chassis. He stayed there for what felt like a lifetime, in a silence so absolute I could hear the frantic drumming of my own heart. When he finally straightened up, his face was pale, his hands shaking visibly. "Ma'am," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, "there's a black box. It's stuck to the chassis. There are red and blue wires coming out of it. They go toward the front, I think toward the battery. It doesn't look like part of the car." Joseph's words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Emt's warning was true. It was all horrifyingly, nightmarishly true. I felt my legs weaken, threatening to buckle beneath me, but I pressed my lips together into a thin, hard line and forced myself to remain standing. "Could you bend down again and take a few clear photos with my phone?" I asked, handing him the device, though my own hands were trembling just as much as his. Joseph took the phone, knelt down again, and carefully, methodically, photographed the object from several angles. When he handed the phone back to me, I stared at the screen. A black box, tangled wires, something that didn't belong. My heart was a wild thing in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, Joseph. Now go back to your work, as if nothing happened. Pretend you saw nothing. Your safety is the most important thing." Joseph nodded, his gaze still clouded with confusion and fear, but without another word he turned and walked back toward the shed. I stayed there for a moment, taking deep, shuddering breaths, trying to force oxygen into my lungs, trying to force myself to think clearly. Then I slipped out of the garden through the side door and called another taxi. Sitting in the back seat, my hands still shaking uncontrollably, I gripped my phone tightly, as if it were the only solid thing in my collapsing world. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't spoken to in years, Michael Torres. He was a private investigator, an old college friend of Ernest's, and the only person outside of my family that I knew I could trust implicitly. I dialed the number, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. When he answered, I heard his familiar, deep, warm voice. "Teresa? My goodness, it's been a long time. I didn't waste time on pleasantries." The time for that was long past. "Michael, it's Teresa Alvarez," I said, my voice urgent, raw. "I need to see you. Right now." I heard him pause for a moment on the other end, the silence telling me he had sensed the raw panic in my voice. "All right, Teresa. Where should we meet?" he asked, his tone shifting from friendly to professional in an instant. I took a deep breath, acutely aware that from this moment forward, my life would never, ever be the same. That afternoon, I walked into a small, nondescript diner hidden away in an old alley in downtown San Antonio. The yellowish light from the hanging bulbs cast a tired, worn glow over the cracked vinyl booths and formica tabletops. The smell of roasted coffee and sizzling bacon grease mixed with the low murmur of a few scattered customers, creating a perfect curtain of anonymity for our meeting. I chose a booth in the farthest corner, a spot where no one I knew would ever accidentally see me. My chest felt heavy, as if I were carrying an invisible stone that was slowly crushing the life out of me. Michael Torres arrived a few minutes later. He moved with a calm, deliberate walk, but his eyes were sharp, the watchful gaze of a man who has learned to navigate the world's shadows. His salt and pepper hair and the sharp lines of his face were the same as the last time I had seen him, over a decade ago at a reunion of Ernest's old friends. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me, observing me with a quiet, attentive intensity, as if he were trying to decipher the terrible story my face was telling before I even spoke a word. Without any need for preamble, I placed my phone on the table and opened the photos Joseph had taken under the car. The tangled red and blue wires and the sinister black box appeared on the screen, a cold, digital confirmation of my worst fears. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowed. He picked up the phone, his fingers expertly zooming in on every detail. He murmured in a low voice, almost to himself, "This is no toy. This looks like a professionally made, albeit homemade, explosive device, connected directly to the vehicle's electrical system." His words mercilessly cut short the last, desperate sliver of hope I had been clinging to, the hope that this was all some kind of terrible, elaborate misunderstanding. I inhaled deeply, a ragged, painful breath, fighting back the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm me. I began to tell him everything. I started with EMT's trembling, whispered warning, then Marissa's suspiciously probing phone call, and finally, what Joseph had discovered beneath the car. I didn't forget to mention the name Empt had overheard Wee speak on the phone, Chen Hao. Every word that came out of my mouth felt like I was lancing a wound, opening a deep, septic part of my life that I didn't want to touch, let alone expose to the light. Michael listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes never leaving mine. When I finally finished, the whole sordid, unbelievable story hanging in the air between us, he remained silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on the worn wooden table. His silence made me even more nervous, but then he finally spoke, his voice grave and firm. "Teresa, you did exactly the right thing by not acting impulsively. The first thing we need to do is keep a very close eye on Wee. He's the weakest link in this chain." He paused, his gaze locking with mine. "But you must continue with your normal routine as much as possible. Go to work by taxi. Do not show any suspicion. If they find out you're on to them, everything will become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous." I nodded, my head feeling incredibly heavy. Inside, I just wanted to scream. I wanted to run back to that house and confront Marissa, to demand answers, to see the truth in her eyes. But I knew Michael was right. I had to restrain myself. I had to keep playing the role of the trusting mother, the oblivious grandmother. "I understand," I said, my voice low but firm. Michael nodded, his expression serious. "I'll have my people follow Wee 24 hours a day. You just stay calm. I will find the truth." 3 days passed like an endless waking nightmare. Every morning, I left the house in a taxi, forcing a bright smile as I waved goodbye to Robert and Marissa. Every evening I returned, sat down to dinner with my family, and listened to Marissa ask about my day with that same sweet, cloying voice that now made my skin crawl. Every time I had to look her in the eyes, I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger, a dangerous predator wearing the face of someone I loved. But I kept silent, just as Michael had instructed, though my heart ached with the poison of betrayal. On the third day, my phone vibrated while I was in my office, pretending to review a quarterly report. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Teresa, I have news," he said, his voice grave but firm. "Meet me at the diner by the highway, near the industrial park off Lopez Mateos. 3 o'clock. I didn't ask any questions. I just replied, 'I'll be there.' When I pushed open the diner door this time, The heavy smell of fried oil and the loud sizzle from the kitchen griddle made the air feel even more suffocating. Michael was already seated at a corner table, a laptop open in front of him. He motioned for me to sit down without a word. "We have results," he said quietly. "That man he's careful, but he's not careful enough." He turned the laptop screen toward me. A blurry video appeared, clearly recorded by a nearby security camera. In the video, dressed in civilian clothes, was entering a dark, narrow alley near the El Mercado night market. He met another man, an Asian man, thin and wiry, with a nervous, hunted look in his eyes and a baseball cap pulled down low to cover half his face. Handed him a thick brown paper bag, and they exchanged a few tense words before the other man nodded and quickly melted back into the shadows. Michael pointed a finger at the unknown man on the screen. "This is Chen Hao," he said. "My people spoke to some of the vendors at the night market. They say he's an undocumented immigrant, no fixed job, known for having some serious gambling debts." He opened a thin folder that contained clear, candid photos of Chen Hao's face and some personal data his team had managed to gather. I stared at the photo, at his thin face and his tired, desperate eyes, and a chill of recognition ran down my spine. Everything matched exactly what Emmett had told me. Michael continued, his voice even lower now, as if he were trying to contain his own emotions. "Teresa, this is no longer just a suspicion. This is a planned, premeditated assassination attempt, and your daughter-in-law, Marissa, is the mastermind." His words were like a direct, brutal blow to my chest. I squeezed the cold, sweating glass of water on the table, my knuckles turning white. Rage and pain, pure and undiluted, flooded me like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep away all my carefully constructed composure. Marissa. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had believed would be the future of Alvarez Lumber. How could she do this to me? For money? For power? Or for some secret, burning resentment I had never known existed? I looked at Michael, my vision blurring, trying to keep my gaze steady though tears threatened to fall. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling but filled with a new, cold determination. Michael looked at me with a serious expression, but there was compassion in his eyes. "We need more proof," he said. "Concrete proof that will stand up in court. I'll keep watching Chen Hao. I want to know who else he's involved with. But you, Teresa, you must continue to act as if you know nothing. One wrong move, one flicker of suspicion in your eyes, and this entire thing could fall apart." I nodded. That night, I pushed open the heavy oak door of the mansion and entered, forcing my body to move with a natural, unhurried gait. The dinner that followed was a play, a torturous piece of theater in which I was forced to be the lead actress. I sat across from Robert and Marissa. I smiled when Robert talked about a new project at the company. I nodded when Marissa asked me about my supposed meeting in San Juan del Rio. "Mom, how was your day? Did the meeting with the partners go well?" she asked, her voice a perfect symphony of sweet concern. I looked her directly in the eyes, searching for any crack in her flawless facade, but I saw nothing but a perfect, polished smile that hid everything. "All good, honey," I replied softly, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm, wanting to break free from my chest. Empt, sitting next to me, ate his dinner in silence, occasionally glancing up at me with his big, questioning eyes, as if asking if I had done anything yet about his terrible secret. The following days, I continued with the agonizing charade. I went to work by taxi, pretended to be busy with meetings and reports, but every time I walked through the door of that house, I felt I was entering a gilded cage, a beautifully appointed trap. Marissa began to show signs of impatience. One night, when it was just the two of us in the kitchen drying the dinner dishes, she said with a tone of false concern, "Mom, why are you still taking taxis? Leaving the car in the garage for so long isn't good for it. If you want, I can take it to the mechanic tomorrow, just to have it checked over." She smiled, but her gaze was cold, probing, as if she were trying to read my thoughts. I set the glass I was drying down on the marble countertop. The sharp clink of the glass echoed coldly in the silent kitchen. I turned and looked directly into her eyes, forcing myself to remain calm, though inside I was boiling with a rage I had never known I possessed. "Why are you so worried about me not driving, honey? Is there something specific that makes you so keen for me to use that car?" I asked, emphasizing each word slowly, deliberately, watching her reaction. Marissa's smile tightened for just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. She looked uncomfortable, flustered. Then she forced a laugh and looked away, busying herself with a plate. "No, Mom, of course not," she said, her tone a little sharper than usual. "I'm just worried about you. I've seen how tired you've been lately, and I thought maybe that was why." She then returned to the dishes with a sudden, frantic energy, but I noticed her hand was trembling slightly as she held the dish towel. I didn't reply. I just took a slow sip of water and let the heavy, loaded silence speak for me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep, an impossible dream. Images and plans and fears mixed in my head in a chaotic, tormenting loop. Emt's warning, Wee's shifty eyes, Marissa's fake smile. They were all pieces of a terrifying puzzle I still couldn't fully accept as real. Around 2 a.m, unable to bear the suffocating air in my bedroom any longer, I decided to go out to the garden for some fresh air. I walked barefoot, feeling the cool, damp grass under my feet, hoping the sensation could help clear my mind. The moon was shining with an intense, silver light, bathing the garden in an ethereal glow that made everything seem both magical and unsettling. I moved slowly, silently, trying to keep my breathing even, though my heart felt like a leaden weight in my chest. As I passed the far corner of the garden, behind the swimming pool, where there was an old set of stone table and chairs, I suddenly heard voices, murmuring. My heart skipped a beat, then began to pound furiously. I quickly hid behind the thick trunk of a large palm tree, pressing my body against the rough bark, trying not to make a sound. From my hiding place, I could see 2 silhouettes sitting in the dark, their voices low but clear in the still night air. I recognized them immediately, Marissa and Wee. My fingers trembling, I slowly took out my phone, activated the voice recorder, and carefully held it up to capture every single word. Marissa's voice sounded tense, laced with irritation and concern. "Are you absolutely sure she hasn't done anything to make her suspicious? She's been acting very strange lately. She insists on taking a taxi everywhere. Did you let something slip, Wee?" Wee responded in a reassuring tone, though I could hear the tension in his voice as well. "Impossible, Mrs. Marissa. I've been very careful. Chen-Hao already placed the device under the driver's seat. As soon as she starts the car, everything will be done." "Maybe she really is just tired." Marissa sighed, a sound of pure, venomous frustration. "No, this method is too obvious, too risky. If that device stays there for too long and the gardener or someone else finds it, the entire plan is ruined. Call Chen-Hao tomorrow. Tell him to remove it, immediately." We hesitated. "Remove it? But no buts?" Marissa interrupted, her voice as cold and hard as ice. "I'll come up with another way. Something more natural. An accident, for example. For now, we need to erase all traces." I stood paralyzed behind the tree, trembling from head to toe. Every word from Marissa was a direct physical stab to my heart. The recording on my phone was now irrefutable, damning proof, but it was also the final brutal blade that severed the last remaining thread of hope or trust I had for her. I carefully saved the audio file and sent a copy to my secure backup email account. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I retreated slowly, step by agonizing step, backing away until I reached the house, slipping in through the back door. My heart felt heavy, as if I were carrying the weight of my entire family's future in my hands. The next morning, as the sun was barely beginning to cast its first pale rays over the horizon, I stood in the living room, phone in hand, forcing my voice to sound steady and businesslike as I spoke to Robert and Marissa. "Today, I have to go inspect a piece of land out in the hill country," I announced. "I probably won't be back until late tonight. It's a potential area for planting new production forests." I heard Marissa's usual sweet voice reply. "Of course, Mom. Take good care of yourself." I took a deep breath, feeling as though I were preparing to step onto a battlefield for a silent, deadly war. I didn't go to the hill country. Instead, I called a trusted taxi and headed directly to the state police headquarters, where Michael had arranged a secret meeting for me with Colonel Vance, the head of the Criminal Investigations Department. Sitting in the back of the taxi, I watched the familiar streets of San Antonio pass by in a blur. At the police headquarters, I was led to a private, windowless meeting room with nothing but an old wooden table and a few chairs. Colonel Vance, a tall, imposing man with a severe, weathered face, sat across from me. Michael was by his side, his presence a small island of calm in my turbulent sea of fear. I began to recount everything. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it to become steady. First, I showed them the photos Joseph had taken under the car, the red and blue wires, the menacing black box. Then, I presented Michael's investigative report, which included the video of the clandestine exchange between Wei and Chen Hao at the night market. Finally, I placed my phone on the table. My fingers shook as I pressed play on the recording of the conversation between Marissa and Wei in the garden the night before. As Marissa's cold, calculating voice filled the silent room, I watched Colonel Vance's face transform. His serious expression hardened into one of grim tension, his brow furrowing deeply. "Are you sure she hasn't done anything to make her suspicious?" Marissa's voice echoed off the bare walls. "Call Chen Hao tomorrow to remove it immediately." When the recording reached that part, Colonel Vance held up a hand, motioning for me to stop it. He looked at me, his eyes grave and decisive. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone, "we have more than enough evidence to act. We are going to set a trap. I need you to go back home and behave as if you are still out on your inspections. Let everything run its course." They took me to a secure waiting room inside the headquarters, a small sterile room filled with surveillance, screens and a radio connected to the police team on the ground. Michael stayed with me. His calm, steady presence was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Sitting in that cold room, I stared at the main screen, my heart pounding a violent, erratic rhythm against my ribs. I knew that what was about to happen would change everything, my family, my company, my entire life, forever. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, through the grainy feed from a hidden camera, I saw an old, unmarked pickup truck park on the street behind our mansion. A team of plainclothes police officers was hidden in nearby cars, waiting for the signal. I held my breath, my eyes glued to the monitor. On the screen, Wei appeared. He approached Joseph, who was trimming the hedges, and pointed toward the pool pump. He handed him a piece of paper and some cash, telling him the pump had a damaged part that could only be purchased at a specialty shop downtown. Joseph, unsuspecting and diligent as always, got on his small motorcycle and left immediately. As soon as Joseph's motorcycle disappeared down the street, Wei opened the back gate. A man with a cap pulled low to cover his face slipped stealthily into the yard and went straight to the garage. I recognized him instantly. It was Chen Hao, with the same nervous, furtive demeanor as in Michael's video. Colonel Vance, who was following the operation by radio from another room, said quietly into his microphone, "All teams in position. Wait for him to start acting." On the screen, I watched Chen Hao open the garage door, pull a small set of tools from his pocket, and crouch down under my Cadillac. I felt my heart stop. Every second stretched into an eternity. Then, just as he reached under the car, Colonel Vance's voice resonated over the tactical transmitter. "Now!" 2 unmarked police cars sped in, blocking both ends of the alley. Officers in bulletproof vests emerged from their hiding spots shouting, "Police! Freeze!" Chen Hao jumped up, his face a mask of pure terror. He tried to flee, but 2 officers tackled him, wrestling him to the ground in an instant. Wei, still, standing by the back gate, was also subdued without being able to offer any resistance. A specialized bomb disposal team, clad in heavy protective gear, entered the garage. I squeezed Michael's hand so tightly, my knuckles ached, my breathing ragged and shallow. Minutes later, the calm voice of a team member crackled over the radio. "The device has been deactivated. It is a homemade explosive device with enough power to completely destroy the vehicle and cause significant damage in a 16-foot radius." Hearing that confirmation, I felt my legs weaken. If it hadn't been for Empt's warning, if I had gotten into that car that morning, I couldn't allow myself to imagine it. Simultaneously, another group of police officers, led by Colonel Vance himself, arrived at the Alvarez Lumber corporate offices. On another surveillance screen, I watched them stride purposefully into the building and head directly to the main conference room where Marissa was presiding over a meeting with the department heads. Robert was also there, sitting at the end of the long table, attentively taking notes. When the police entered, Marissa frowned, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Excuse me, we are in a meeting. What do you need?" Colonel Vance walked directly to her and held up an arrest warrant, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Marissa Reed, you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder." The entire room fell into a stunned silence. Robert leaped to his feet, stammering, There must be some kind of mistake. What are you talking about?" Marissa's face turned ashen, but she tried to maintain her composure. "This is slander. What evidence could you possibly have?" Colonel Vance didn't answer her. He just signaled to an officer who turned on a small, handheld recorder. The voices of Marissa and Wee from the garden the night before echoed through the silent, shocked room, clear and crisp. "Call Chen Hao tomorrow to remove it. I'll find another way, a more natural one." Marissa's confident smile instantly vanished, collapsing as if it were made of sand. She stumbled backward and fell heavily into her chair, covering her face with her trembling hands. Robert and I were taken to the police station. We weren't brought to the interrogation room itself, but to a special observation room next to it, where we could see and hear everything through a one-way mirror. The first to be interrogated was Chen Hao. He entered looking nervous and defeated, his handcuffed hands shaking behind his back. When Colonel Vance informed him of the charges he was facing, conspiracy to commit murder and illegal possession of explosives, his face turned ghost white. In less than 10 minutes, he lowered his head and, in a trembling, broken voice, confessed to everything. He admitted to having crossed the border illegally years ago, living in the shadows and sinking deep into gambling debts. He said we had contacted him through an illegal casino at the El Mercado night market, offering him a large sum of money to pay off his debts and start a new life. "I only did what he asked me to do," Chen Hao mumbled, not daring to look up. "He gave me the layout of the house, Mrs. Alvarez's daily schedule, and told me the best time to plant the device was in the early morning when everyone was asleep. He confessed that he didn't know how to make bombs himself, but he knew someone involved in the arms trafficking trade across the border. He had bought the explosive from that contact, following Wee's detailed instructions. Hearing him lay out the cold, calculated details of the plan sent a fresh chill down my spine. I looked over at Robert. His hands were clenched on the edge of his chair, his knuckles white. I wanted to say something, anything, to comfort him, but my throat was tight with unshed tears. Then it was Wee's turn. He entered with his head down, but with a defiant expression still etched on his face. At first, he denied everything, his voice cold and steady. "I don't know anything about any alleged bomb. This is all a lie." But when Colonel Vance placed Chen Hao's signed confession and the video from the night market in front of him, his composure finally crumbled. He fell silent, his eyes darting from side to side, and then, with a heavy sigh, he lowered his head and began to confess. Wee admitted that his motive stemmed from an incident many years ago. He had stolen a small piece of my jewelry, a necklace. Ernest had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary to sell and pay off his gambling debts. When I had discovered the theft, instead of calling the police, I had made him publicly apologize in front of all the household staff. I thought at the time that I was teaching him a lesson about honesty and giving him a second chance. I had told Ernest it was the compassionate thing to do. But for Wee, it was a public humiliation he could never forget or forgive. He had held a grudge ever since, and when Marissa approached him with her plan, he had accepted immediately, both for the sweet taste of revenge and for the large sum of money she had promised him. Hearing those words, I felt my heart clench. I never imagined that an act I had considered to be one of mercy could have planted the seed for such a terrible, hateful conspiracy. I looked at Robert, wanting to take his hand, but his gaze remained fixed on the glass, as if he were trying to understand how the world he knew could have become so twisted. The next day, I was in my office, trying and failing to concentrate on work, when Robert walked in. He placed a signed divorce petition and a letter of resignation on my desk. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but resolute, "I can't stay here. Every corner of this house, of this company, it just reminds me of her. I need to leave." He told me he was taking EMTT to the small house in the suburbs of Austin, where our family had lived in the early, struggling years. It was a place filled with pure, untainted memories of his childhood, a place that had not been poisoned by Marissa's betrayal. I looked into his eyes and saw a pain so deep and an exhaustion so immense it frightened me. I knew Robert needed time to heal, to find himself again. "Go," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "And when you feel strong enough, come back. Your mother and this company will always be here, waiting for you." I stood up and hugged him tightly, feeling his body tremble in my arms. When he left, I remained standing in the silent office, looking out the window at the sunlight glinting off the neatly stacked lumber in the yard. In the days that followed, the mansion became empty and cold. MTT's bright laughter no longer echoed in the halls. The comfortable, easy scenes of family life were gone. I only heard from my son and grandson through brief, sometimes stilted video calls. Emmett would tell me about his days running through the fields, about the butterflies he had caught. But in his eyes, I could still see a deep sadness he couldn't yet express in words. Robert, in the few times we spoke, would only nod and offer a weak, tired smile, as if trying to keep me from worrying. A year passed in the blink of an eye, though for me, each day felt like a long, arduous journey. I dedicated that entire year to holding Alvarez Lumber together, to managing the media crisis that erupted after the scandal, and to maintaining the morale of our loyal team. The work was so intense, so all-consuming, that I barely had time to surrender to my own sadness or to dwell on the painful memories. But every night, when I returned to that vast, empty mansion, I felt an emptiness that was impossible to fill. The laughter was gone. The family was gone. And the presence of Robert, the son I had always believed would be by my side, was gone. I learned to live with the pain, though that didn't mean I ever got used to it. Every time I looked at the long dining table, I could still see Marissa's face, her fake, brilliant smile, and my heart would ache all over again. But I repeated to myself, like a mantra, that I had to be strong, not just for me, but for Robert and for Empt. I had fought to protect them, and now I had to continue fighting to prevent our family from completely falling apart. One Friday afternoon, while I was reviewing the quarterly report in my office, my secretary gently knocked on the door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you." I looked up, a little surprised, as I had no appointment scheduled. The door opened and Robert walked in. I was speechless. He looked different. His skin was tanned from the sun. His body seemed stronger, firmer, and most importantly, his eyes no longer held that vacant, haunted sadness from before. And standing next to him, holding his hand, was Empt, a little taller, with a radiant, gap-toothed smile and eyes that were once again full of joy. "Grandma!" Empt shouted, letting go of his dad's hand and running toward me, his arms outstretched for a hug. Robert stood in the doorway, smiling, a genuine, warm smile, the first one I had seen on his face in over a year. He walked closer and said, his voice warm and full of a newfound strength, "Mom, I'm ready." Those 3 simple but powerful words were like a gust of fresh wind that dissipated all the heavy, suffocating weight I had been carrying on my chest. I stood up and hugged him tightly, feeling the solid warmth of his body, as if I were embracing the entire world I thought I had lost. Empt ran to us, his little arms circling both of us, forming a warm, tight family hug. At that moment, I felt tears finally rolling down my face. But this time, they were tears of relief and of a happiness so profound it was almost painful. Robert returned to work, but not to the executive office as before. He chose to work in the main workshop, where he could give free rein to his passion for wood carving. I would watch him, his hands covered in sawdust, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully sculpted every detail on the pieces of wood. And I saw in him the same passionate, creative look that Ernest once had. Robert designed a new line of furniture that combined modern techniques with the timeless simplicity and elegance of artisanal craftsmanship. When the collection hit the market, it exceeded all expectations, breathing a new, vibrant life into Alvarez lumber. Customers were delighted, our partners congratulated him, and I knew that Robert hadn't just returned. He had rediscovered himself. Months later, at a board meeting, I stood up in front of everyone, my voice trembling slightly but firm. "I have dedicated my entire life to building Alvarez lumber," I said, looking around the room at the familiar faces of the people who had stood by me. "But now, the time has come to hand it over to the next generation." I announced my retirement and ceded the position of Chief Executive Officer to Robert. When he stood up to present his vision for the company's future, I saw Ernest's reflection in his eyes, the same passion, the same determination, the same unwavering sincerity. I knew then that I could finally be at peace. My life entered a new, quiet phase. I sold the large mansion that held so many memories, both happy and painful. I moved to a smaller, more manageable house in the suburbs, with a beautiful garden full of petunias and fruit trees. I adopted a golden retriever and named him Ernest, in honor of the man who was always my greatest inspiration. Every morning, I took him for a long walk, breathing in the fresh air and listening to the birds sing, as if life itself were reminding me that beautiful things still remained. Joseph, after retiring, often came to help me with the garden. We became good friends, sharing quiet afternoons under the shade of the old oak tree, drinking tea, and reminiscing about old times. He would tell me stories of the early days, when he first started working for my family, when Ernest was still alive, and I would tell him about the dreams we once had. Those simple, peaceful moments helped me to heal, little by little. Every weekend, Robert and Empt came to visit me. We cooked together, tended the garden, or simply sat on the porch to watch the sunset. Emmett loved to tell me about his school, about his new friends in Austin, and I noticed that his smile was becoming brighter and more frequent. Robert, although he still bore the invisible scars on his soul, had learned to live again for his son and for himself. One afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun poured through the window of my small house. Sitting in my favorite armchair, I stroked Ernest's soft fur as I watched Robert and Empt laughing in the garden. The boy was trying to climb an apple tree, and Robert was pretending to be a roaring monster, threatening to bring him down. Their laughter mixed with the sound of the wind in the leaves, creating a perfect, simple melody of life. I closed my eyes, feeling that peace, true and lasting, had finally returned. I have faced betrayal, the threat of death, and the loss of a part of my family. But I didn't give up. I fought not just to survive, but to keep what was most valuable. Robert's love, Empt's smile, and the legacy that Ernest left behind. Sitting there, in the warm glow of the sunset, I understood that the truly important thing in life is not a successful company or material achievements, but those quiet, precious moments of calm, when my family was still together after overcoming the biggest storm of our lives. After everything I lived through, I understood that the greatest tragedy of human beings is not betrayal itself, but trusting the wrong person. I used to believe that kindness and love could change everything, but sometimes it's that blind faith that makes us pay the highest price. I lost almost everything, my trust, my happiness, and a part of my heart. But from those ruins, I learned to rise again, stronger and wiser. Life taught me that no matter how dark the night, truth and justice will always eventually shine through. And most importantly, that the sincere love between a mother and a son, between a grandmother and a grandson, is the only light that never goes out, even when everything else collapses around it. The story you have just heard has had the names and places changed to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and reflects. How many mothers might be suffering in silence within the walls of their own homes? I sincerely ask myself, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have chosen to keep silent just to maintain the peace? Or would you have found the courage to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story shared can become a light that guides others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Now on the final screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most loved stories. I'm sure they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.